Why do I start every video by coughing? Hello, everybody. It has been a while since I've been seen in such a state. I believe I was like this in the opening of my Full Metal Alchemist video, which is not on YouTube. Thanks for that, Warner Brothers. So anyway, I've been talking with some friends recently. Again, you all know who you are. And we just been talking about the kinds of content that we were making yesterday. And I kind of wanted to branch out a bit more into music, just because I feel music is a very it's not as ubiquitous as, say, video games or films, which you have literally hundreds of channels to watch with, on both subjects. But in terms of music, you've got what? You've got Anthony Fantano, you got Deep Cuts, and you got LP Club. Shout out to LP Club. You're a swell man. So I just wanted to talk about music, and this isn't going to be formal. I just kind of wanted to talk about stuff. This is not going to be as structured, because I liked my Porcupine Tree worst to best, and it didn't go well at the beginning just because I had an equipment failure, but now I've got my I've got my mic stand, and you can probably hear me a lot better, and the audio is not total dog shit, and I'm shooting with my good camera instead of a GoPro. So, you know, that's nice. So I wanted to do more informal videos. Not sure how I wanted to start it, just because I think music is very differently structured into how you approach it when compared to, say, movies and whatnot. So I just wanted to make a video that sort of gets you, or just videos, I suppose, because I'm gonna make more. They're like acclimating you to what my taste in music is, so, you know, you can pick as to whether or not you actually give a shit about what my opinion is. So, yeah. The first video I elected to make was me talking about my favorite albums in the metal genre. And I wanted to do that because it's probably, metal and, progressive rock are probably the two genres I consume the most of. And not, I don't know, I just feel like metal, man, it doesn't get enough, respect for people talking about it. You know, you'll have the odd, I know Anthony Fantano likes metal, but it's just do you ever hear people talk about metal bands other than maybe two people on YouTube? Not that I'm saying I'm going to be any popular, but you know what I mean. Under-discussed topic. And if, you know, this will also let you decide whether or not you give a shit about my opinion, and whether or not I can even articulate my opinion at all. So I want to do this for multiple genres. I thought about doing progressive rock first, but I think metal is... I've been consuming a lot of it recently, and I just sort of felt the urge to. So yeah, let's just talk about some of my favorite metal albums. Let's start at the very beginning. Not really. Okay, first we've got... it's more complicated. Volume 4 by Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath is a doom metal band that became popular in the 70s, and it's led by Ozzy Osbourne, as you probably know, one of the most famous musicians ever, and good old Ronnie Dio, who I am a huge fan of because he went on to do a lot more projects than just Black Sabbath. Dio didn't get on vocals until the album Heaven and Hell. Everything before that was just Ozzy. And so, you know, a lot of Sabbath fans are just kind of like, oh, I prefer Dio, or oh, I prefer Ozzy, or whatever. Volume 4 is their 4th album, and this is the only Black Sabbath album I own, which is why I wanted to use it as a visual aid. But when I talk about my favorites, I mean probably more or less the first 7 Black Sabbath albums. They're a great band. I only recently, you know, in terms of music, discovered them. So a couple months ago, I had been listening to this, Volume 4, I got it at a half-price books, and I listened to this, and I really liked it. It's one of Sabbath's, it's one of their more toned-down records in terms of, you know, metal, because, you know, metal has this sort of reputation as being kind of abrasive and loud, with honestly, it couldn't be further from the truth. If you want to get into metal, if you've always been looking to, but you're like, some of this just doesn't look like it's for me, a great place to start, in my opinion, is Black Sabbath. Doom metal is a genre of metal that... It's probably my favorite subgenre of metal. It's not as heavy, it's not as intense, it's a bit more theatrical, it's more accessible, too. A lot of Black Sabbath, especially the earlier records, sound like 70s progressive rock albums, to be perfectly honest. There's a song on here called Changes, which sounds eerily similar to some of the work that Pink Floyd put out in their earlier career. But when I recommend Black Sabbath, I'm talking about Volume 4. This is not my favorite Black Sabbath, it's just the one that I have, but it's up there. The self-titled is very good, kind of rough, but charming in its lower production appeal. It's very sinister. Then there's also Heaven and Hell, which is a bit later, and Heaven and Hell is like tied for my first favorite. There's also Master of Reality, which is a bit more... It's a bit heavier, but it's also a bit more psychedelic. And I'm a fan of when Black Sabbath gets kind of more psychedelic. Master of Reality is probably inches slightly above Heaven and Hell for being my favorite. I would just go and find the first couple albums. They falter a bit. They had a lot of middling albums after the first couple ones, and then I think their return album, which I think was their last, was pretty alright. It was good. But you can tell the band they had aged. Not in the way bands like, say, Motorhead did, where they were still sounding like they were 20 years old back, like, a year before Lemmy died. But yeah, Black Sabbath is fantastic. This, we got Volume 4, Heaven and Hell, self-titled, Paranoid, which is probably all of the material that you've heard. That's the one where Paranoid is on that one, Iron Man's on that one. But yeah, I'd say Master of Reality is my favorite. You got songs like Sweet Leaf, songs like Children of the Grave, which have these really... A lot of it is a little bit more lo-fi. Heaven and Hell is really like bombastic and big, but the earlier ones are a bit more down to earth. So yeah, check out Black Sabbath if you want to get into metal, and I am a very big fan, very big doom metal fan. Dio, Holy Diver. And I just mentioned Dio for Black Sabbath. This is his, like, solo project. He also worked on a progressive rock outfit called Rainbow, where they had a couple of really good albums, like Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, Long Live Rock and Roll. I think there's a... No, Rising. Rising's not. But those albums are great, and this is more his solo project. It's his first album, in my opinion, the best one. Very underappreciated album. I think that it's probably just because it's not as big of a name as something like Black Sabbath that it gets overlooked, but it's very well regarded in, like, you know, the metalhead circle. It also has one of my favorite metal songs, which is Rainbow in the Dark, and if you haven't looked up Corey Taylor of Slipknot doing a cover of Rainbow in the Dark, do yourself a favor and get on that shit, because it is some quality stuff. This album is a bit more bombastic than Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath is a bit more laid back as a whole, even though they have really intense, exciting moments, like on Heaven and Hell, and I would very much compare this to that record. It's not quite as good. There are a couple songs on here where I'm like, like Gypsy, whatever. But it also has Stand Up and Shout, which is one of the best metal album openers ever, and yeah, I'd highly recommend this. I got this for super cheap. I checked it out on a whim, and I ended up really, really loving it. And so, transitioning back into doom metal, if, like, this used to be my favorite doom metal album until one I'll discuss here in a moment, but we have Ghost, Meliora, their third album and most recent, until June 1st when Prequel comes out. I'm very excited about that album, very excited. But yeah, Ghost is a Swedish doom metal, heavy metal outfit that is... They really play up the theatricality of doom metal, like, to the point where Ghost is a band that exists so that you could probably see them live. Like, if you've seen footage from their live shows, it's fucking insane. But it's cool. I really want to go to a concert of theirs. But this album is one of the few albums I can consider, like, totally perfect. And I'm even more stingy with, like, my 5 out of 5 rating on albums than I am with movies. And this one's it. There's this. I also have the deluxe edition, which it comes with the songs that were released in the EP Pope Star, which I also really like. Square Hammer is on that. Nocturnal Me, they did a cover of an Echo and the Bunnymen song, which is fantastic. I Believe, good cover. Missionary Man, also a good cover that a lot of people don't like, but I kind of do. I don't get it. And Bible, which is one of my favorite songs there. But the rest of the album is great. You got, it's really, it's very cleanly produced, which is not common for doom metal. That being said, the intensity, the rawness, the sinister and also spooky kind of vibe is very apparent. Like, it's actually kind of goofy in places. Like, the opening track here, Spirit, it opens with, like, Halloween decoration noises, like, woo! But it's super fun to listen to. This is a great album to just, like, stick in when you're driving around and you just want to blast some shit. They have a very explosive, very entertaining sound. They have a very, they're very... I don't want to say satanic because that has negative implications, but they have, like, kind of a narrative going with their albums in the sense that they're, like, putting on a performance, like, performance art as well as performing music, in the sense that, like, I don't really believe that they, like, worship the devil. I think it's part of a persona, but that's still very much in here. You have songs like, Cerise, where it's, like, trying to seduce this person to come and, you know, experience the dark side. But yeah, there's some great stuff on here. Anthony Fantano reviewed this and gave it a fantastic review, so, you know, that's pretty high praise coming from him. I would highly recommend Ghost. They have 2 other albums right now. They're gonna have 3 June 1st. I'll probably review that because I want to. Their first album, Opus Eponymous, is fantastic. I have a shirt with the album for Opus Eponymous. Great. It's, if you want something a little closer to Black Sabbath, it's a bit more raw and not as, like, clean, but still really, like, listen to Opus Eponymous. It's fantastic. Almost as good as this. Infestessimum is their sophomore effort, and it's kind of a sophomore slump. There's some good tracks on there. I think the latter half of the record is much better than the forward half. It's really melodic and kind of boring, to be perfectly honest, and some of the songs just outstay their welcome, but it's still worth checking out just to see if you like it. It's still a good album, in my opinion, just less good than their other work. Ooh, this is a bit different. If we're gonna get into more lo-fi, garage metal, progressive rock, garage rock with King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard. I love these little sleeves for albums, by the way. The jewel casings are fine, but I like these. This is a band that is definitely not as popular as the ones that I just mentioned. King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard are an Australian psychedelic rock, garage metal band that they've made a bunch of albums, and they reinvent their sound slightly on all of them. They were audacious enough to, last year, in 2017, release 5 albums in 1 year, which, from any artist, you'd think, like, that's fucking ridiculous. But we had all 5 albums, in my opinion, were good. Some better than others. My 2 favorites of last year being Polygon of Wanaland, it's a mouthful, and Murder of the Universe. Both of those albums made it on, like, my top of the year list, but they also had other albums, Flying Microtonal Banana, which it's ridiculous sounding. It's a great album. They had Gumboot Soup, also good album, and I think it's Witches of Brunswick East. Might be that one. That one didn't really work for me, but it was still enjoyable enough. Like, if you like that kind of music, you'll probably find it more enjoyable. But, yeah, this is my favorite album of theirs. This is Nonagon Infinity. Nonagon Infinity is essentially a bunch of tracks that's just one big, long song broken. Like, the flow from track to track is completely seamless, and it's all awesome. This is another put this on while you're driving your car, because it's loud, it's abrasive. It's really like nothing I've ever heard before, just because it's such a, like, unique combo of many different things, and we have so few modern bands and artists that do this kind of stuff, so I really value it. They also have a bunch of really good records like I'm in Your Mind Fuzz, which came out, it's more on the psychedelic side, but this is a bit heavier, this is a bit more leaning into metal. And yeah, I really like it. I would highly recommend you check them out if you're like aching for that kind of thing. And another modern metal band, which are increasingly rare nowadays because it's mostly subgenres of metal that branched out after the year 2000. Like, basically what happened was metal ruled the 80s and part of the 90s, and then the sort of mainstream absorbed metal and then made it kind of squeaky clean, like Metallica on some of their later albums are accused of selling out, which I hate that term, but they were clearly trying to appeal to a new core audience, and they tried a bit too hard. And then metal became really soft and safe, which in my opinion is what brought about the subgenre of nu metal, which is the really intense, loud, in-your-face shit like Slipknot and Korn, which, again, Slipknot is probably the only truly good nu metal band, don't at me. But that sort of happened, and I think when nu metal died, which it died a pretty shitty death because that genre is not full of a lot of good bands, it sort of bore alt metal. You have people like, you know, Deftones working now, who are, I'll probably mention later here. But again, modern metal, it does not have a great representation in terms of like core metal genres, and my favorite modern metal band, other than probably Ghost, is gonna have to be Baroness. Baroness has released 4, technically 5 albums, because one of them is a double album, and they're all named after colors. This is purple. This is their most recent album, 2015. My favorite of theirs, every bit as good as Meliora, in my opinion, if not quite as good production-wise, I guess, if that's any complaint I have. But this is full of bangers. First 3 tracks on this, Morning Star, Shock Me, and Try to Disappear, are just fucking awesome. I love them. And the rest of the album's great too. It's very progressive metal, it's also kind of sludge metal, but it's still very easy to get into. This is their catchiest album. I would recommend, if you want to get into the band, listen to this first, or their double album, Yellow and Green. I'm not the biggest fan of Red, which I believe is their first one. It's still good. It's a bit more on the stoner metal side of things, like a band like Sleep. And Blue I am a big fan of. Blue is a really good one. But they sort of graduate from stoner metal into prog metal and sort of sludge metal. But this is, I think, indisputably their best. They're very comparable to... They have some flourishes of thrash metal, like on their latest one. They're also comparable to Opeth, a death metal band that I will also be talking about. But go check them out. They are great. They are some of the best musicians that I think are working today. The guitarist especially. Fantastic work. Love it to death. And now, time to get basic. Okay. In terms of metal, the most accessible band that is not Black Sabbath, in my opinion, that usually gets people into metal is Metallica. And Metallica is, you know, it's baby's first metal band, which is not a slight against them. I think Metallica does get a lot of shit for being popular. And I kind of think people forget that people usually become popular because they're good at what they do, and Metallica was good at what they did from the outset. Kill 'Em All is a fantastic debut album, and it gets criminally overlooked, but the holy trinity, as it were, of Metallica albums, we have, of course, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All, Ride the Lightning. In my opinion, they're 3 best albums. Kill 'Em All is also up there. I thought I had Kill 'Em All somewhere, but I can't find it. I guess I don't have it. Maybe I thought I did. But thrash metal is a genre that the more I look into, the more I discover I'm not a huge fan of, but Metallica is a bit easier on the ears to listen to. I'd also recommend Anthrax if you haven't checked them out. They're very similar, just not quite as good vocals. Yeah, Metallica has some great output. They have faltered a bit in the middle of their career, like I mentioned earlier, but they have picked themselves back up. I think Death Magnetic was an alright record, and Hardwired to Self-Destruct was genuinely enjoyable. But I think these 3 albums are just some of the best that this genre has to offer, all of the like classic Metallica singles that aren't on the Black Album, which is also great and gets too much shit. They're on these. You've got One, which is one of the most famous Metallica songs, which is on Justice for All. You've got Master of Puppets, which is just, like, pretty much every track on here is a classic. You got Leper Messiah, you got Master of Puppets, you got, Welcome Home. Great album. This is commonly considered to be one of the best metal albums and Metallica's best. I don't agree with that. I am more of a Ride the Lightning person. Opening track, Fight Fire with Fire, followed up by the title track, Ride the Lightning, is just fucking great. It's great to casually listen to. If you just want some metal to consume, this is probably where you want to start out. It's not like they're devoid of substance or anything, but they are quite good at introducing you. It's just that don't expect a lot of bands from the same genre to be quite as good, just because Metallica knew what they were doing. That's all I have to say. They have some great records. I think Kill 'Em All is fantastic. Go check that out. Go check out Black Album and Hardwired to Self-Destruct. They also have a compilation of covers that they did, which are mostly good. Some of them are not. They covered some songs that I like. They covered Stone Cold Crazy by Queen, which is fucking cool. Thank you for showing me that, Morgan. And they also covered Loverman by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, which is another one of my favorite bands, so you can't go wrong there. Yeah, check out Metallica. Even if you don't like them, you still gotta. If I had to pick, like, the album that you should use to get into them, I'd say Ride the Lightning. The production on Injustice for All is my biggest problem with these albums. It's just very badly produced. Every song I have on the album, I've downloaded from YouTube because the bass is so fucking quiet on that album. I had to find a version of the songs with added bass to really enjoy them. So go do that. And Master of Puppets is great. Just don't start with it because you might peak early. But yeah, great albums. All of them. Recommend. Highly. Now we get to what is, I'd say, my second favorite metal band? Now, probably? Too close to say. I'll say it's tied for first. This is Opeth. If you do not know who Opeth is, you're doing it wrong. I'm kidding. Opeth is not they're not a very mainstream band. I hate saying that because it sounds like a fucking pretentious hipster thing to say, but they really aren't. They're most notable for the fact that Steven Wilson of his solo career and Porcupine Tree fame produced the latter half of their albums, and did a great job. This is My Arms, Your Hearse, which is one of their earlier albums, and this is the first one that I think I truly fell in love with. This is another perfect album, in my opinion. Do not listen to Opeth first to get you into metal. There are many things about this band that have a very specific and niche appeal. Prog metal, in general, is kind of a slippery slope with that. Baroness doesn't quite tread on the abrasive side of things. Opeth, on the other hand, does. Opeth is mainly categorized by the fact that it has two modes. It sounds a lot like a prog rock band because of Mikael Ackerfeldt's vocals being very sweet and dulcet, and he can just flip it 180 and then sound like a howling, deep, voiced demon. And it's so impressive to hear him go back and forth. And having had a career this long, I don't know how he's maintained his voice like that. And I wasn't into, the growling kind of metal or death metal that these guys usually put out with in my music infancy. I just kind of found it too difficult to absorb. But I felt like Opeth sort of it has just enough progressive flourishes to ease you into enjoying them. And My Arms, Your Hearse is a very deeply artistic album about loss and death, and there's a lot of very slow, pondering moments. It has one of my favorite opening tracks, April Ethereal, and it's just a very oddly personal album that you don't get from a lot of other metal bands, and this is just the album of theirs that I own. This is not my favorite, despite the fact that I think it is a perfect album. My favorite is Damnation. Listen to Damnation even if you don't like or want to get into metal, because Damnation is straight up prog rock, and it's great. Very somber, very sad and kind of eerie. Love that album. Probably top 10, like, of all time. Oh, also, this, like, list here, this is not in any particular order, although I probably will talk about my favorite ones last. But yeah, go listen to Opeth. Blackwater Park is their biggest celebrated accomplishment, and I cannot disagree there. Blackwater Park is a fantastic album. Do not listen to their more recent stuff. It is more accessible in the sense that it's more prog rock, but it's also really fucking boring. Go listen to their early stuff. I think if you start out chronologically with Opeth, you grow to like them more. Whoops. Sorry. Wanted to make sure the camera was still in fact rolling. I have a problem with that. I recorded my Blu-ray update video 6 times. None of which I was able to use. I said this before in the last time I recorded it, and it just kind of occurred to me that I didn't ever make that clear. I will make that video one day, but after 6 tries, I gotta stop. Anywho, Opeth, listen to them. Start chronologically. Their first album is kind of like a death metal Iron Maiden album, and it just kind of progresses, and like they have a very good slope album-wise. It's like a good build-up and then send-off. But yeah, if you want to try out death metal, go for Opeth. You cannot go wrong. I also like their albums Watershed. Morning Rise is good, but I don't think it's as good as the ones that follow it. I'm forgetting one. Oh, 2. Damnation has a companion piece called Deliverance, which is probably the heaviest album they made. There's also Still Life and Ghost Reveries. Ghost Reveries I also really like. Still Life is also just very immaculately produced and performed. So, you want some good-ass metal, death metal, go Opeth. Can't go wrong. So, that is those are the ones that I own. I have a couple more I want to talk about that I don't own yet. I mentioned Iron Maiden a second ago when I talked about their first album, and so Iron Maiden, yes, Iron Maiden is a great, prolific metal band that is very hit and miss with me. I love a lot of their albums, and I am lukewarm or completely ambivalent to, like, another half of them. I listened to their discography recently, even the bad albums. But they have a lot of good ones. I don't love them as much as most people do, but they have some keepers. My 2 favorites being probably their 2 most acclaimed, that being Powerslave and Somewhere in Time. Probably Somewhere in Time, just because that's an all-killer, no-filler album, and I think Powerslave has, like, it has, like, 1 track I don't like. They also have Number of the Beast, which is a great record. Seventh Son, despite being a very progressive, like, oriented album, I am not a huge fan of. It's good enough. However, it's just very safe, very clean, and I think Iron Maiden excels when they are just doing, like, really chugging heavy metal and power metal. And Powerslave will do you just fine in that department. Somewhere in Time is a bit more progressive, to be honest, but it strikes the balance far better. Those 2 specifically. Number of the Beast is also good. Killers is good. Self-titled, also good. And they had, their most recent album was called Book of Souls, which is, again, also very progressive, which is weird because they're the only band where I don't like when they venture into that. Book of Souls is okay. It's not one of the worst Return records ever, but it's very long. Like, every song on there is, like, at least 6 minutes, so it's just really taxing to actually listen to. And it's not like Powerslave, where, yes, most of the songs are that long, but they're all really good. So, yeah. Iron Maiden, definitely check them out. Okay, I mentioned alt metal earlier as being like a response to the backlash that came with nu metal, which I don't know how accurate that is. I'm forming my opinions based off basically cultural osmosis, so take what I say with a grain of salt, I suppose. That in particular, I do know some shit about some things. Bleh. But, however, there is a band called the Deftones. Deftones are weird. They are alt metal. I'd throw a bit of experimental in there, sometimes even electronic, sometimes progressive. Their sound is really yet to be replicated. It's also kind of shoegazy, like shoegaze metal, especially the album Saturday Night Wrist. However, I am a big fan of them, but mostly for 2 albums. That's it. I haven't listened to a Deftones album that I would deem bad. The least favorite one I've listened to is Saturday Night Wrist, and then maybe followed by the self-titled, and then maybe Gore and Koino Yokan, which, again, all fine albums, but their crowning jewel is White Pony. White Pony is what happens when an alt-metal band listens to a lot of Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails and combines it. Every popular Deftones song is mostly from White Pony. It's a pretty celebrated album. The best song on which I think is Digital Bath, which there's a lot of great covers of out there. Go check out the metal band Rollo Tomasi. They have a great cover of that song. But these guys are not as heavy, as intense consistently. They do get really heavy and intense. There's the other album which I really like from them is called Diamond Eyes, and that like starts out with is it the title track? I think it's the title track. The opening is just very like, whoa, in your face, explosive, but they also have more mellow moments, like on Digital Bath and Gore, which is mostly just kind of shoegazy. But I really love their sound. They have a really unique alt-metal sound. The lead singer is absolutely fantastic, delivers some great performances. They use a lot of distortion, a lot of electronic stuff. Just very weird. Again, it's kind of like if Trent Reznor made metal. That's how I would describe it. So check them out too. White Pony is a personal favorite of mine. And speaking of shoegaze, wow, I am on top of it with segues. Shoegaze is a genre that is very spacey and very mellow, so combining that with metal you wouldn't think is a very good idea, but it allows for a lot of unique sonic direction. And in my opinion, the best artist at this / band is the band that is a French metal band called Alcest, except it's spelled A-L-C-E-S-T. I probably pronounced that wrong, but I've heard a couple people say Alcest and Alcest, and because it's French, I'm gonna go with the second pronunciation because it sounds right. But they are a band I think is just very, very, very undervalued. They are a black metal / shoegaze / just metal band, and it's actually really not a band. From what I understand, it's one guy. He does all of the instrumentation. And I've listened to the entire discography. I believe there's 5 albums, all of which are very good. My favorite of which being the most recent, called Kodama. Yes, like the little Princess Mononoke things. Kodama is very spacey, very dark, has some heavier moments, but it's a great metal album to fall asleep to. Not in a boring way, it's just, it makes you enveloped in the sound, like it's surrounding you. It's very beautiful, very unique. They also made an album, it's very hard to translate their other, like, I have to do a lot of translating when I get into some bands because some of them are French. Another one, I think might be Swedish, and they had all their Swedish names for their songs, so I had to go and translate them. However, there's also their title out, they're not titled, their first album, which is, I believe, called Voyages of... Wait, let me check this first. I don't want to give out false information. Oh, boy. Let's see. Memories from Another World, their first album, is also fantastic. I'd say that's their second best. Just a little meandering, maybe in, like, the end. They have very long songs. They have another album, which is called The Journeys of the Soul. Very good. Not as good as The Scales of the Moon, in my opinion, which in French I believe is called Escaille de Lune. Fucking, I don't know. But that one's my third favorite. My least favorite of theirs is Shelter. Nothing about it is particularly bad. It just kind of sounds like a less interesting version of their previous work. So yeah, check them out. It's not for everybody. Like, if you are into metal because it's like, you know, it's fucking hard. It's hard shit. Don't. This is like metal by way of an orchestra, which, again, it's got niche appeal, but it appeals to me. And moving on, we have a band that I am very mixed on, that being Tool. Tool is a band led by Maynard James Keenan and that guy from the Smashing Pumpkins? Or is that Perfect Circle? Tool and Perfect Circle really run together in my head, I'm sorry. But it's basically a project led by Maynard James Keenan. Most people know what the deal with Tool is. Even if you haven't heard of Tool, you've probably heard the song 46 and 2. The O'Keefe Music Foundation has a fantastic cover of that by a lead singer who is like 8 in that version, but fucking just nails those notes. 46 and 2 is not an easy song to sing, but Tool is like, they've made 4 albums, and all 4 of them are considered to be like untouchable. 2 of them especially, Lateralus and Enema. Like, these are albums that pretty much everybody ubiquitously loves and praises genius, and I gotta fly my contrarian flag. I don't like them as much as everybody else does, especially Lateralus. I like a lot of Enema, but that album detours itself so often and becomes, like, it just kind of goes up its ass. There are parts on that album that I love. That's the album 46 and 2 is on. I believe the opening track is Stinkfist, which is one of the best Tool songs. But it is very, like, it has an entire song that is just electricity sound effects, and it's 4 minutes long. It's not an instrumental interlude. It is just that. Ions. And, like, I hear some people talk about it in reviews. Like, the music website that I frequent is Sputnik. A lot of people review that album, and they're talking about, oh, well, this track here, it pumps you up for the next one. Like, and then there's another track, which is a voicemail, and I'm just like, just make the fucking music. I'm not like, you can enjoy ambience and instrumental interludes. Lord knows I do. I mean, I like the Mars Volta, for fuck's sake, but they don't feel like they're in service of anything on Tool. That being said, I like Anima more than Lateralus. Lateralus is pretty much widely considered to be their best work and one of the best albums ever made. I just kind of think it's pretty good. It's a solid, like, it's a 3.5 out of 5, a 7 out of 10. A lot of people like to pay attention to how the music was composed, about how Maynard used it using, like, the Fibonacci sequence, and that's all well and good, but if it's not in service of music that I like listening to, then it's not really, it doesn't matter that much. And, like, half of Lateralus is great, another half of Lateralus I find completely innocuous. I don't remember so many tracks from the album. This being said, because everybody loves those albums so much, you owe it to yourself to listen to them, because you could very end up likely disagreeing with me. However, I do have more positive notes on their other 2 albums that more frequently get way overlooked. Their first and last. Undertow, which is better than Lateralus in my opinion, but not as good as Enema. Undertow is it's a bit rougher, and Tool is already a very roughly produced band. Their aesthetic is very much grimy and grungy. But Undertow is just straight music. There's none of the flowery, superfluous shit on the other albums. It's just song, 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 song. Some of it gets kind of repetitive, some of it kind of blurs together. However, there is a lot of great tracks on there. I think it is a very underappreciated album. But my favorite of the Tool albums, which is funny just because I love this album so much more than the others, that being 10,000 Days, their most recent album, which I believe came out in 2006. 10,000 Days is a straight fire, all-killer, no-filler album that I adore. Opening track, Vicarious, probably my favorite Tool song. Wings for Marie Part 1 and 2 are at least close to being my favorite Tool songs. And, like, it's perfected their sound, I believe. It sounds a bit like the older band Meshuggah, if you're familiar with them, and I kind of like that. But it gets overlooked. Go listen to 10,000 Days, because I hate feeling alone in saying that that's my favorite Tool album, because even a considerable people, like, they like Undertow. If it's, like, they're just like, I know it's not better, but it's my favorite. Nobody's favorite is 10,000 Days. However, very much is mine. What are you gonna do? Ooh, a recent discovery of mine was that I really like Judas Priest. Haven't checked them out until now for some reason, but they dropped a new album this year. Judas Priest made an album called Firepower. And Firepower is basically a shoe-in for my top 3 of the year, I'm gonna say. It is an album where it's like, these guys have been making music for almost, if not 50 years, and they don't sound like they've aged. I mean, honestly, you could say, like, you could change the order, like, switch Firepower with Screaming for Vengeance, and I'd say they were recorded at the same fucking time. It's really impressive. There's maybe 2 tracks that are just kind of like whatever, but man, the first 5 tracks on that album are just such fire. It's so fast and aggressive and good. Love that album. But that inspired me to go check out their other stuff. I really like the album Sad Wings of Destiny. A bit more progressive, a bit less heavy than their later work, but their comeback album in the 90s was called Painkiller, and that is the album that everybody knows, and everybody should listen to that album because it's fucking great. Every song is good. I have nothing bad to say. It is just some pretty awesome power metal. Title track is Painkiller, and it just, oh god, so good. So good. Stained Class is one of their more critically acclaimed albums that I do not like as much because I find the production on it to be very thin, very, light. It's very strange to describe. It's just not as, it does not have the punch that even their older albums had, in my opinion. British Steel, also an album you need to listen to. Great album. There's one album by an artist who is, again, does not get enough exposure, and has only made one album of the genre because she continuously makes albums that are under different classifications, and that's Chelsea Wolfe. Chelsea Wolfe is one of my favorite modern musicians because nobody really makes music like she does. Even when it's like honed in, and you can be like, oh, I can sense a little, like, oh, this is a little bit of Sabbath, a little bit of Reznor, a little bit of Kate Bush, a little bit of Nick Cave, a lot of Nick Cave influence, and oh hell, what's the, who did Nick Cave bang? I can't remember. Somebody who had sex with Nick Cave, who is a good artist, sounds like Chelsea Wolfe, but I think Chelsea Wolfe's voice and vocals are what put her above everything else. She has her first album, which I think is called Mistaken Parting? I don't remember because I don't like the album very much. However, that is her only album that I am lukewarm on. She has an album after that called The Grime and the Glow, which is amazing, and covers You Are My Sunshine, and it's literally the most terrifying song ever recorded. The way the production on that song works, and her eerie-ass, echoey vocals with the slowly more demonic-sounding instrumental is absolutely bone-chilling. I used that to as inspiration for some of my more darker moments in my writing. And that should tell you all you need right there. But she also has albums that follow that that are, like, Grime in the Glow is good. Everything post Grime in the Glow is, like, classic. Apocalypsis, which is my favorite album of hers, is very Nine Inch Nails. Very Downward Spiral, another one of my favorites. But it's very gothic rock. She kind of has the central goth identity as her main genre and then branches off a bit every time. Then she has an album called Pain is Beauty, which is gothic, kind of like a really dark version of The Cure. Probably pornography era The Cure, but with her more willowy voice. All of her vocals are very echoey and spacey, and normally I would I'd find that very I don't know, cheap, just because, you know, anybody can do it, but with her I think it really works. She also has an album called Abyss, which is at least as good as Apocalypsis. It's pretty heavy, like, hard gothic rock. Not quite metal, a lot of electronic stuff. It's a very, like, brittle album to listen to, but it is some deep, dark shit. However, metal-wise, she only dipped her toes into the water more recently. Abyss has some kind of metal-ish tracks on there, but his Spun, her 2017 record, is straight doom metal, and it's fucking awesome. Doom metal has never really been, like, sinister or, like, actually eerie or scary, with the exception of maybe a couple bands. Like, Black Sabbath, kind of, on the first album. But again, they get kind of theatrical, a lot of theatricality. No, his Spun is doom metal, but it sounds like some dark shit. There's a theme of duality that runs throughout that entire record. Once you really listen and absorb the lyrics of the songs, there is some dark shit she gets over and kind of lays out on the table on this album, to the point where it makes some songs very uncomfortable to listen to. That being said, I highly recommend it because it is a shaking experience. It is a terrifying album. If you want to know how creepy she gets, look up the opening track to Apocalypsis called Primal/Carnal. It's literally 25 seconds of her snarling, which we think, that sounds kind of funny. It's not funny. It makes me pee my pants. Two more. Band that is, I guess, folk metal, pagan metal, Viking metal. Don't know how to classify them specifically, because I think they said they were more pagan metal, which is not really a genre. They just kind of said that. But it's Viking metal, kind of thrash, kind of progressive. It's got flourishes of everything. There's a band called Moonsorrow, and they are really cool. I discovered them because of their 2016 album, Jumalten Ica. I have to translate their albums and song titles, but it translates to The Age of Gods, which is great. I think it's 6 tracks. They have really long songs, but they're great. They're a lot like Opeth, just in a different language. They're very heavy, very wicked sounding vocals that are like kind of higher pitched than what you're used to, but they're basically just snarls, but they're very fantasy oriented. They're like, each album feels like a fantasy epic, and all of their albums are great. And they have a really large discography too. They've just made a whole lot of music, and it's hard to get a hold of some of their albums just because they're overseas and they're not super popular. But they had Jumalten Ica was a very critically well-received album. Go seek that out if you want something a little bit more different. It's very Nordic. It just feels very old Europe. A lot of the sound effects and whatnot are very much Viking-oriented, like marching and like Viking choirs. They have an EP called Tulimirski. I don't know how to spell or say that, but I think it translates to Firestorm, I think? It is great, and it has a cover of the Metallica song For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is awesome. it's so cool because it's like a Viking choir that comes in on the chorus, and it's so silly. I love it. I love it so much. But yeah, very underrated band. There's no wrong place to start. All of their albums are really good, but I started with Age of Gods, and that was a pretty good entry point. So I would start there. Their production on it's very good. Some of their older albums, like I think there's one called Of Strength and Honor, which is a little bit more roughly produced, but it's just kind of, it goes hard. And finally, we'll talk about my last two, which are, well, I guess this is technically more than two. There's one band that I find nobody talks about except for my friend Alex, who apparently knew about them before I listened to them, is a metal band, a death metal band by the name of DIssection. They have, I think, three albums, I think. It's not many. Their most recent one was sort of a comeback one in the 2000s, and it didn't fare so well. It's very middling. But their first two albums, the first one is called The Somber Lane, which is a great introductory point, but their second album is called The Storm of Light's Bane, and that's probably my favorite death metal record ever. It is very much like Opeth, but the vocals are a bit more clear, a bit more higher pitched than Mikael Ackerfeldt's are, but this album is so eerie and somber. Like, you look at the album cover, which is like this Grim Reaper, like on his horse, and it's all like purple and dark, and it's got like snow, and that just sets you up like whatever you think it's gonna sound like, that's what it sounds like. So many good songs. Thorns of Crimson Death is one of my favorite metal songs ever, and Where Dead Angels Lie may just be my favorite metal song. I don't know. Otherwise, though, great album. I have nothing bad to say about it other than if you like death metal, get your ass to that album. Everybody needs to listen to them. And finally, what I would consider now to be my favorite metal records are from a band called Candlemass. Candlemass is really old. I even think they, again, I'm not an expert here, but I think they might predate Black Sabbath. Maybe. If not, around the same time. I'd heard of them. I found them out mainly through the website I would go to, which is Sputnik Music. They have, like, 2 albums, their first 2 albums, which are, like, 2 of the highest rated albums on that website, which is a very difficult feat to accomplish. Their first album is called Epicus, Doomicus, Metallicus. I'm not shitting you, that's actually the real title. And it's probably my favorite metal album of all time. Very doom metal, very Black Sabbath. However, the lead singer of Candlemass has such a unique voice. The only way I can describe it is this sounds like a slightly less bombastic version of Ghost, or a slightly more energized version of Black Sabbath, if you had the lead singer of Depeche Mode. That sounds really weird, and it's a great combo. Like, seriously, like, Songs of Faith and Devotion era. I don't know what the lead singer of Depeche Mode's name is. I'm so bad. Morgan's gonna yell at me. It sounds like him. And I love it. Maybe a little deeper, but I love it. It's probably the best debut record I think I've ever listened to. 6 songs, 43 minutes, pretty digestible. It's beautiful. For an album with as stupid as a title as Epicus, Doomicus, Metallicus, it is very somber, very intense, very enveloping, and it's very surprisingly easy to listen to. Great opening track, Solitude, one of the best album openers of all time. Love it, and love it about as much as I do the Black Sabbath song Solitude. Both great. But yeah, that is a great album. Listen to that album. Probably my favorite, and Nightfall, their second album, is just as good. I don't like it quite as much because I think I like the lesser production value of the first one a bit more. It's a bit less polished, and I think that lends it some charm. Nightfall is a bit more clean. Like, Epicus, Doomicus, Metallicus is to Candlemass what Master of Reality is to Black Sabbath, so it makes sense that I like it. However, Nightfall is to Candlemass what Heaven and Hell is to Black Sabbath. It's kind of fantasy-oriented, very intense, very, a bit quicker in pace, lighter in tone, and I'm listening to their third album right now, just like these past couple days, which is called... Look it up. I'm sorry. I'm so unprofessional. Ancient Dreams. Also great. Again, very comparable. I'd say it's just as good as the other ones. I'd give them all 10s. All 3 of them. They are the only band other than... I think Pink Floyd that I have given 3 10 out of 10s to their records. Not an easy feat from me. My favorite band, Porcupine Tree, my favorite record of theirs is the only one I'd give a 10 to. So that should give you an idea as to how good I think Candlemass is. I'm going to listen to their entire discography. Apparently, it's slightly downhill from here just because their first 3 albums are so good and so well regarded. But I love these so much, I really gotta check them out more, and I think you should too. They're very good for music aficionados.